when it comes to SMU football, they're back on the field. They're in pads. Fan day was Saturday. I wasn't there, but we did have our newest contributor, Eddie Moran, helping us out, getting practice video, taking all the reports down. But I was there for Wednesday through Friday, and including the first day in pads, which was Friday. And I think the big thing I look at when I see SMU is I see a new attention to detail. And Scott Simons met with the media on Saturday and had a lot of good things to say about how they've progressed into this team that can focus on the fundamentals. And if you're watching on our YouTube channel, you see them working on some special teams fundamentals and things like that. But that is just one key piece to SMU and what they've been able to do during fall camp. During fall camp, they've opened up with a ton of special teams, individual drills, work, technique, all those things. But they've also, especially on the defensive side, obviously, gone through tackling drills. And that was something that Scott Simon says they really haven't necessarily been able to do early on in their tenure. They haven't been able to address that as enough. And he said that all the way last year. They wanted to do more tackling, but they needed to get the guys on the same page. And that was a work in progress throughout the year. This year, and they said they were going to do it in the spring, and they did it. They focused a lot more on tackling and technique. So for SMU, they're building off of that spring emphasis, which was tackling. And now they're going into the fall and continuing that. And look, the first 2 days, it was kind of abbreviated, hour and a half or so that SMU was working on things just in shorts and t-shirts and kind of getting loose. And that was a large focus of it. They didn't do that much team. And then once they got in pads, they expanded things a little bit. But that focus on technique and fundamentals was certainly still there. And that's one of the biggest takeaways I've seen. And as this group, which despite having about 40 new faces on the roster, they have the veteran leadership to help guys along. You have an Ahmad Walker who's played in Scott Simon's defense. You have a Kobe Wilson who, talking to Chris Adamora, he's the first guy in there at 5 a.m. He's the last guy out. That's the Temple transfer that came in at the linebacker room. You've got a lot of veteran guys who have been at different programs, and you also have some of the younger guys who already have a year of college football sprinkled in around there. Your Kyron Chambers, your Jordan Hudsons, your Jalen Davis Robinson, Keyshawn Mills, guys like that. But for SMU, they're able to focus so much of their time now on tackling and fundamentals. Look, you didn't want to have a defense out there that was trying to learn the plays, but gosh, they could, tackle if they were ever in the right position. I think SMU is trying to limit as best they could the big plays, and I think at times they were able to do that. I still think a lot of the big plays that they were giving up were moments where, look, there was bad technique, and we know how thin the defense was. You look at the safety unit, you look at the linebackers, it wasn't a deep group. Now you look at this defense, and it's just night and day difference from a depth perspective. And I think Chris Adamora is a prime example of that. He comes in at the linebacker room with Ahmad Walker, Kobe Wilson, Jaquandis Burns, who's the veteran returning that isn't getting talked about, Alex Kilgore, the true freshman who enrolled in the spring, and Chris Adamora is bulked up about 15 pounds, and he's one of the most athletic linebackers SMU has. So this defense, from really top to bottom, is just so different in terms of what they can emphasize fundamentally, because they're going to have multiple groups that can really accomplish what they're trying to defensively. And if they don't, they're not going to play. And so there's that competitive level that SMU is getting out of these defensive players that is allowing them to push them more from a tackling perspective, from a fundamentals perspective, because everyone's expected to pick it up when it comes to year 2 of the Scott Simons defense. And I think defensively, one thing we've seen throughout fall camp so far, and it was reiterated to me again today before I recorded this podcast, is they're able to make some serious plays on the ball this year because they have more trust in this defensive scheme. They're able to grab some interceptions and be able to make plays on the ball a little bit more because they have more trust around them in terms of what they have in that defense. They also have a defensive line that can affect the quarterback a little bit. They've got a big guy in Jordan Miller, Elijah Chapman, Elijah Roberts, who's been really impressive in fall camp, Devere Levelston. Corey Roberson, Cam Robertson, Nelson Paul, Isaiah Smith. They just have all these guys that can affect the quarterback and allow the secondary, which is really the most impressive revamp position group that SMU has, and allow them to make plays on the ball. I've seen Jonathan McGill grab an interception. We've seen Brian Massey take one to the house on a pick six in Monday's practice. Brandon Crosley had a pick six. There are multiple guys that have made plays on the ball because they have more trust. And I think that's a huge deal. And Scott Simons put it really simply, I think, on Saturday when talking with the media. He said, we're aiming for 2 a game. That puts SMU right in the top 25, top 30 of defenses in takeaways. And you want to know what that does? Go back and look through the years. That puts you in position to have one of the better defenses in the country. When you take away drives in today's age of college football, that changes your yardage given up, all those things. And that's obvious stuff. But when people talk about this defense taking the next step and how they can improve, the biggest thing they have to do is take away the football. And having the secondary to do that, I think, is something that is really important. And so as SMU continues to work on tackling, you can save yards there. But one thing their secondary is going to allow them to do is to make plays on the ball. And I think they're much more aggressive. They're much stickier, as I put it in one of the practice reports, against some of these receivers as they're going up against them. So I think when you're watching SMU's secondary, and if you've been out to practice, you know this, it really is completely different from what we've seen in the past. So I like what the secondary has done a lot. I think they have so many options, and they're going to have guys that could emerge later in the year. If you look at the young guys, those second-year college football players that they have, like a Kyron Chambers, Jalen Davis Robinson, Keyshawn Mills, AJ Davis, guys like that, I think despite adding veterans like Chris Meganson, Charles Woods, Jonathan McGill, you have Brian Massey back, you have Brandon Crosley back, Ahmad Moses is a second-year guy. Those are the types of players that could get better and elevate their games, and all of a sudden, you're looking at a team that really has a 2 deep in the secondary across the board. And I think that's a special situation for SMU to be in, and that's one of those things where you can take the next step as a defense when your defensive backs aren't being asked to play so many plays a game, when they're not being asked to just don't mess up, don't take risks, we don't have anyone else. That's the biggest change for this SMU team this fall, is going to be that ability to maybe be aggressive, because you know that the defensive line's getting after him. You know the linebacker group might be a little bit more athletic than last year's. They're brand new. They have to prove it. I've said that. But it's a group that is gaining a little bit more confidence day in, day out. And for the secondary, they're the biggest beneficiary of all of this. And I think talking with Jonathan McGill, you can tell this is a group that is very confident. And I think Jonathan McGill is quickly rising up my list of best transfer gets for SMU. And he was already a good one, but I think just his professionalism, his ability to make plays, and he's kind of been through every situation, and he's just so mature. That's going to help this defense so much when it comes to putting it all together. And so I really like where SMU stands defensively. They were ahead of the game the first week of practice. That's really not surprising. On the flip side, you get the offense, where I think they've done a really nice job with Preston Stone trying to keep it simple for him and Kevin Henry Jennings to lead off camp. And they have a lot of new guys. They have a lot of players that are trying to mesh together on the offensive line. They have a couple new receivers and tight ends. They have some new faces. They had a really good end of spring. And I think the offense is always something that you want to see incremental growth and improvement when it comes to what they're doing. And I feel like SMU's offense can have that. And in fall camp, they're really trying to make sure everybody's on the same page. And I think Preston Stone has done a really nice job of improving. The first couple days, I think there was a lot of rust. And this is just walkthrough stuff you're seeing on the YouTube channel if you're watching. But for Preston Stone, there were moments where you thought, okay, that's rust. That's a missed pass. And you were wondering kind of where some of the mistakes would potentially come. I think he's done a really nice job of taking care of the football in fall camp, which is what one I want to see. And I think his arm has shown that it's continued to get stronger. It's continued to get in a better situation than it was last year. And he's done a great job in the weight room. I think Jordan Hudson has made some strides. But if you look at the offensive side of the ball, and we'll kind of wrap up here with a few takeaways because there there is so much to still be solved on the offensive side. The biggest takeaways are that you have a receiver room that is so deep. You have an offensive line that is still working on figuring out who the starting guys along the left guard and maybe because of that center, but we're seeing some things get figured out pretty quick in fall camp. And I think Jalen Knighton is going to be an absolute star. He's just different. And so I think SMU is going to have one of the best backs in the AAC, and maybe even you can start sleeping on him a little bit in terms of the country. But I think his explosiveness is going to help so much. Kamar Wheaton's come in and looked like a totally different player. He's still developing, but he has looked so much more mature, better, etc. When looking at how he is physically. And the position groups that position battles that are still up for grabs, you look at left guard. Logan Parr has come on a little bit. Ja'Kai Clark, the Miami transfer who came in overweight, could show up and really start to lose some of that weight and maybe get a little bit better physically and be able to factor in there maybe right away. But you have Ben Sparks, you have Cam Irving, two veteran guys that are still in the mix there maybe. But Justin Osborne has been healthy. Branson Hickman has really held down the center spot. And I don't think necessarily it's close because I don't think where Ja'Kai Clark stands right now, they're ready to trust him for the center spot because he's not in good enough shape. But that could change. He's moved around well for a guy who's probably hovering around 340, 350 right now. I think he moves very well. I can see why he played right away as a true freshman at Miami, and he let his weight get away from himself in the spring and in his last month at Miami in June. So he's got a ways to go to drop that weight and get better. But I think he has shown the ability to maybe be somebody that factors in over the course of this year and be a sixth guy, whether it be at guard or center even, to help Branson Hickman or to help Logan Parr. But Logan Parr looks like he had a great first week of camp and has really helped himself long term. I think the outside position at the wide receiver room, Jordan Curley, Jake Bailey, Roderick Daniels, those are kind of my three starters, with Rod and Jake really maybe sharing the slot position. But you have a guy in Moochie Dixon that's really making a move. I think Keyshawn Smith has started off camp well, and I think Jordan Hudson has as well. I'll also mention I think Teddy Knox has been a really nice surprise in camp. So things are looking good at the receiver position. When you move over to the defensive side of the ball, I still think you're trying to figure out what the perfect formula is at linebacker because you have Ahmad Walker, who is a clear-cut starter, but Kobe Wilson, Chris Adamora, Alex Kilgore, all three of those guys are showing that, and Jaquandis Burns, all four of those guys are showing why they should be on the field, but they're all different guys and they're all different players. So I think that's a good thing in a sense because you don't have to rely on one body type at that spot. You don't have to rely on Ahmad Walker play in, play out. You could rotate another guy in. I think that's a position group that is still being solved. And Maurice Crum has a good problem on his hands. It's much better than what it was when he first came in, at least kind of on paper and trying to figure out what it would look like long term. But I just think this SMU fall camp has really shown me, just to kind of close up here, I think this is a team that can really win the conference. And I've not really wavered from that on paper, but just seeing them and what they could put together overall because of the depth they have at so many positions. And there are question marks. There's question marks on every team in the country. You look at some of the college football favorites. I mean, Georgia has a new quarterback this year. That's a big question mark. SMU has a new quarterback this year. Big question mark. We've seen spurts of Preston Stone and what he can do, and it looks pretty good. Kevin Jennings looks pretty good. Can they put it together, especially Preston Stone, for the entire season and lead them to a conference championship. That's what he's going to have to show. We're going to have to see another tight end step up. We're going to have to see the left guard spot be solidified. We're going to see how the heck SMU figures out what to do with these running backs. Who gets the carries? But Jalen Knighton looks like he's really emerged as a really nice option to be the starter. Defensive end, who's the lead pass rusher? Linebacker, who's that other spot next to Ahmad Walker? Is there any shakeup in the safety room? All of those questions, very, very valid. SMU has depth like I've not really seen in a while. It shows on special teams when they're running through drills and they're running through units. All of those units are littered with guys that can play. So I think SMU's in a great spot. It's early in fall camp, but there's a lot of reasons to be positive about this team despite what's going on in conference realignment. The biggest thing they can do right now is win. They've got to. We know that. They've got the team, at least on paper, that can do it.